Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, my name is Christina Kent, and I'm an artist based out of San Francisco. And today I'm going to be painting a simple pastoral landscape with lots of texture. So I start this painting, I'm doing a composition with a really high horizon line, and it's a pretty simple composition. So I'm going to be painting this field. It's like some farmland from a photo I took when I was in Oregon. And yeah, it's this green field with a farmhouse in the background and just some trees on the edge of the farm. So it's a really simple composition. We have this linear horizon line that I'm just putting in with some dark transparent paint. And I'm just marking out lightly where the trees are and where the farmhouse is, just to give myself a little bit, some guidelines for when I start blocking in the colors for this painting. And with this painting, like I said, the composition is really simple. And what I wanted to emphasize was, I kind of wanted to emphasize this simple composition and how it can still be complex and interesting when we play with color and texture. So at this point, I'm starting to block in some of the color of the field that takes up the majority of this composition. And you can see that this field, I'm starting to put in some dark greens, and usually when I'm blocking in colors, especially if I know I'm going to be developing an area a lot, I like to start with the colors a little bit darker than they might be in the final version, and then I find it's always easier to layer on the lighter colors. So I have this really dark foreground. There was also a strip of lighter green grass kind of towards the horizon, and I thought about just making the grass all kind of one continuous piece, but I liked that unique element of having that strip of greener grass in the horizon. So I've kind of marked that out here. And then as I'm laying in the paint, I'm kind of putting a lot of light and different strokes of paint. So I'm slightly mixing different shades of green and then laying that in and just gradually covering the surface in these small brush strokes of slightly varying shades of green. And so I think that gives the block in a little bit of complexity already, because I don't want it to just be one flat green mass. I want to get a sense of depth from this field, and I want it to look, I want there to be something interesting for our eyes to focus on when we're looking at the field. And so once I have the field covered in kind of this complex green mass, then I go to block in the trees that are in the background. And because they're far off in the distance, they were cast in this beautiful blue tone. And that was one of my favorite things when I was visiting Oregon. I felt like there were always trees or mountains far in the distance that just looked so, so blue. I don't know what it was about the light or what, but it was just really beautiful. And so we have these blue trees in the distance, and then so I block in those first, and then there are the trees that are more in the foreground, a little bit closer than the other trees, that I mix a sort of warm greenish brown color for those trees. And I'm just blocking these in quickly, but they're not going to be the main focus of the composition, so I'm not worrying too much about these shapes as I put them in. And I know that I'll be able to adjust them as necessary later on in the painting process as well. I also add the white roof of the farmhouse, which I just thought was a charming little detail, and it's something that you see a lot driving around in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, but I just thought it was so cute. And then also adding in the sky, which it was kind of like a slightly overcast day. It was pretty rainy, and so the sky was this very, very bright white blue. As I put in the sky, I'm also carving away some of the shapes of the trees themselves, sort of like refining those shapes, and I add a little bit of accents, some sky holes, to get a sense of the foliage of the trees. Now that the block-in is finished, I'm going to start adding texture with the palette knife. And this is a nice thing to do. So when I do this, I want to make sure that I have enough paint on the canvas that I can really move it around. So if you notice, like, I wasn't using medium, I was just using the paint straight out of the tube. And so I have a decent amount of thick paint to work with the palette knife. When I'm using the knife, I also will take some extra paint from the palette and use the knife to add the paint to the canvas. Sometimes I use the knife to scrape paint off of the canvas or the panel in this case. And other times I just use the knife to move the paint around. And this process, I would say it's really intuitive. It's hard to explain exactly what I'm doing and what my goal is here, but if I can try to explain it, I would say I'm looking to create some interesting textures, some interesting variations in the hues and the shades of color, and also some very interesting edges. So I want some edges to be very sharp. I want some colors to stand out strongly against each other and not really blend into each other. And then I want other edges to be really soft where shapes start to blend into each other. I'm still trying to create the sensation of looking at a field. So I want it to seem like it is a field of grass, but at the same time, I also want to enjoy the texture and the quality of paint. So I think I want to capture kind of the softness of the grass, and also the natural variation. Like if you look at a field of grass, some parts will be lighter than others, some parts will be darker than others, just based on the texture of the grass. So I am trying to get at that here with the knife, but also just trying to create some interesting shapes and textures and get a sense of balance too. I don't want there to be too much dark in one area. I also don't want there to be too much light in one area. And I also don't want things to be just evenly spread out across the whole surface. So I'm using the knife as a kind of to push the paint around, to apply some lighter hues of paint, or in some cases add back some darker hues of paint, scraping the paint away to create a surface that I think is just really interesting to look at and that also moves the eye around the image. Another thing that I'm thinking about is how I still want to create this sense of distance. So in the foreground, I'm using kind of larger shapes and broader strokes with the palette knife. And then as I move closer to the background, to the farmhouse and the things that are off in the distance, I'm sort of using smaller marks to give the impression that things are sort of disappearing off into the distance. And I like the sense of depth that that can create. I also thought that the light of the sky was really beautiful in how it was falling on the grass and highlighting the grass in different ways. So I'm adding in this lighter kind of minty blue-green color to get at that. But at the same time, sometimes it comes off a little strong. So then I'll go in and add a darker color, or sometimes I'll scrape some of that lighter color away until I achieve the right balance. And that's what I'm really going for here with the palette knife. I can't control everything that it's doing, and it does. One of the beautiful things about using a palette knife is that it creates some random strange textures that you just can't get with the brush, and I really like that. Like I like when I create some shape and it's like, oh, I don't even know how I did that. But at the same time, yeah, I don't have complete control over what the palette knife is doing. So sometimes I'll make a mark and I'll really like it. Other times I'll make a mark and I'll find that it was too much or it wasn't enough. So I kind of just go back and forth, adding paint, taking paint away, until I get to a point where I feel like the texture is balanced, the edges are balanced, things are working together in the painting as a whole. And once I reach that point with the field and I feel like everything's working, I like the textures, I like the shapes, then I just go to refine some of the details in the little house in the background and in the sky. I bring out some more of the details around the trees and also soften some of the edges around the trees so that it's not just marks from the brush, but also using the palette knife to make those marks. I really like using the palette knife to soften some of the edges between the trees on the horizon and the sky, and just make that line or those edges that separate those shapes a little bit softer to give a sense of atmosphere and distance. So here's how the painting turned out. As you can see, it's this nice pastoral scene, really simple composition, but I think I have some interesting stuff going on, especially in the foreground. As you can see in this detail, there's just some really cool palette knife marks and texture going on that I think that just takes this painting to the next level. I hope this video maybe has given you ideas on how you can use palette knives in your own work, or just inspired you to play around with different ways of making marks on the canvas. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for making these videos happen. If you like my art, you like my videos, and you want to help me make more, then check out my Patreon at the link. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.